That's all the time we have left tonight. Shannon Bream takes on things from here. Miss Shannon.
We'll continue our prayers for him as well, Laura. Thank you so much. And here's what we have coming up tonight.
Downplaying the idea he'll have to interview with special counsel Robert Mueller, is President Trump suddenly injecting some uncertainty into what his legal team has insisted is the closing chapter of the special counsel probe.
We'll see what happens.
And as top congressional leaders work on immigration, the president comes under fire for leaving it all up to them.
My positions are going to be what the people in this room come up with.
And just what is it causing top Republicans to call it quits?
We see the future, and it ain't pretty.
We'll hear from soon-to-be retired House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte. Plus, we investigate the plight of Christian refugees from around the world, like Tabitha from Egypt.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight, a bipartisan group of senators is reportedly making progress on a border security deal, which would also theoretically solve the question about what happens to hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants known as the so-called Dreamers. The reported progress comes a day after President Trump aired a very public gathering of lawmakers and put the ball in their court to do something. He suggested he's willing to sign off on any deal they hammer out as long as it funds a border wall. An actual deal could still be a long way off, with anti-illegal immigration hardliners worried about getting sold out by Republicans eager for a deal, and Democrats still getting pressure from advocates for open borders and unlimited immigration. All this on a day the Trump administration cracks down on illegal immigrants coast to coast and says it's just getting started. Trace Gallagher has that story live from Los Angeles. Trace?
Shannon, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, got started by going after nearly 100 7-Eleven stores nationwide, arresting 21 people accused of being in this country illegally. ICE says these are not raids, they are audits, meaning that instead of targeting employees of 7-Eleven stores who may be in the country illegally, ICE is going after the store owners and managers who might be hiring illegal immigrants and paying them less than minimum wage. ICE says in the future, these types of operations are, quote, not going to be limited to large companies or any particular industry, big, medium, and small. It's going to be inclusive of everything that we see out there. He goes on to say these operations will continue to expand under President Trump, but they didn't start under Trump. In fact, these new 7-Eleven audits are simply an expansion of the investigation that began in 2013 under President Obama. And it was President Obama who dramatically increased the number of ICE audits from George W. Bush. And if you look back at the numbers over the past 8 years, you will see that in 2017, President Trump deported fewer illegal immigrants than any year during the Obama administration. Immigration authorities say that's mostly because the border is under better control with stricter enforcement. So as a result, fewer illegal immigrants are trying to cross the border to begin with. The lower deportation rate also has to do with the fact that under President Trump, the number of illegal immigrants arrested inside the United States has gone up significantly, and that has led to a major backlog in immigration courts, meaning cases are being processed at a much slower rate. Remember, it can take years for an undocumented immigrant to make it through the legal pipeline. We should note that despite the lower numbers of people being arrested at the border, the Trump administration maintains that a wall along the border is still very much needed. Shannon.
Trace Gallagher live for us in Los Angeles. Thank you, Trace. Well, a year into
the wall. We need the wall for security. We need the wall for safety. We need the wall for stopping the drugs from pouring in. I would imagine that the people in the room, both Democrat and Republican, I really believe they're going to come up with a solution to the DACA problem, which has been going on for a long time, and maybe beyond that, immigration as a whole. But any solution has to include the wall.
Okay, so the wall is definitely in. Joining us now, Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies and Susan Ferricchio, the Washington Examiner's chief congressional correspondent. Welcome to you both. Good to be here. Okay, so Mark, let's talk about the wall, because we had a couple folks on last night discussing this who aren't convinced that it's the end-all be-all solution to the problem. Is it part of the solution? Is it necessary to have it along the entire length of the border? What's your assessment?
Well, it's an important tool. I mean, walls or fences or whatever they are, because it has to be different in different places, is an important tool. It's not a silver bullet. But the fact that it's not going to be along all 2,000 miles is something the president said even 2 years ago in primary debates. So this isn't some backtracking or anything. It's just obvious. There are parts of the Texas border, Big Bend, for instance, in Texas, where it's a sheer cliff on the Mexican side. There's already a wall, and God built it. Other places, you do need a wall. And my only concern is the president hammers it all the time as though it's the #1 thing we need, when in my opinion, it's on the list, but it's not at the top of the list.
Okay, so they have a lot to get through, Susan, to get this deal done. You cover this on the Hill. I want to read something from Louis Gohmert. He is a congressman out of Texas, a Republican. Part of what he put in an op-ed in the Daily Caller today, he says this: if Republicans again help pass an amnesty bill, no matter what legalistic or deceptive name it is given, without first securing the border and building a wall where it is needed, enough Republican voters will stay home next November that the majority will be surrendered to the Democrats. He adds this: following that devastating loss, the first order of business for new House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in January 2019 in the 116th Congress will be an impeachment vote regarding President Donald Trump.
Well, any border wall deal is going to have to involve legalizing the DACA, the Dreamers. So nothing is going to happen unless there's that key trade-off. Those two things have to trade off. Everything else is negotiable at this point. Will there be extensive border security? Today, Republicans introduced a bill in the House kind of laying down their marker of what they want to see. It goes well beyond a wall. It's interior enforcement. It's dealing with not releasing people out into the United States where they never show up for their court date. It's all kinds of things that go well beyond the wall, and the Democrats don't like it at all. They don't like the wall. I think they know they're going to have to put down some money for that wall in exchange for legalizing the Dreamers if they're able to get this deal. But they don't want to do the more extensive stuff, and that's what the House Republicans want, and what Louis Gohmert is talking about. But there has to be some initial trade-off here. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen, because you do need 9 Democrats in the Senate. So, sure, the House could probably pass a bill that was introduced today by House Republicans. But that's not going to go anywhere because there's the filibuster in the Senate, and so it's going to get blocked. There's got to be that trade-off.
And I think there are some things that are in the House bill that there are actually Republicans in the Senate may not go along with, things like E-Verify and some other things that some over there may not get on board with. We're going to talk to Congressman Goodlatte, who is one of the authors of the bill and introduced it today. He's coming up in a short time, so we'll try to dig into some of those details with him. But Mark, when we talk about some kind of legal status for the 800,000 or so estimated who are here, who were brought here as kids by their parents, they're not kids now, and we always like to make that distinction. Most of them are grown adults, many of them working and doing plenty of things here of asset to this country, but they are here through a means that was illegal. And a lot of people think if you do give them legal status, it's just going to encourage the next wave of people that are brought here by their parents or in some other way that is not initially by their own fault.
Any amnesty is going to do that. In fact, amnesties always have 2 effects. One, that you suggest that it attracts more illegal immigration. The other is it leads to downstream chain migration. So when they get legalized, they then sponsor their family members. That's why any DACA deal has to deal with both of those things. It has to have enforcement that blunts that surge of new illegal immigration that would come, but also gets rid of the chain migration category, so you don't end up giving amnesty, in effect, to the parents as well. A few years down the road. That's why this package has to be there. Simply trading some border money for amnestying, say, 700,000 DACAs is a guarantee that it's going to fail, that the bill is going to fail, because it's just going to have more illegal immigration, and you're going to have a surge of legal immigration a few years down the road. You have to have all those things together in a package. You can't have what the Democrats call a clean DREAM Act. That's a recipe for failure.
Susan, quickly, we're almost out of time, but how would you handicap this as far as something actually getting done? Is it a 3-month, 6-month, year-long?
Maybe not at all,
track?
Where they just extend DACA for another year and do nothing. It's now being held up in the courts, even the idea of deporting them or taking away their work permits. It's going to be a struggle because there's such a difference between what border security should be and what the Democrats are willing to give. What I'm told on Capitol Hill is Democrats are really resisting the border security aspect of this. If they continue to do so and won't put their votes up for such border security, nothing is going to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of the American people want an explanation on why they would feel that way about border security. So we'll see. There are pressures on all sides here. Mark and Susan, great to see both of you. Thanks for coming in. All right, President Trump standing firm on the border wall, but apparently wavering on whether he will talk with the special counsel, investigating allegations that his campaign colluded with the Russians. The single greatest witch hunt in American history, that's what President Trump called the Russia collusion investigation today. As reports surfaced that FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein met with Senate Intelligence Committee leaders today, maybe others as well on the Hill. Ed Henry is here to tell us what it all means for the president. Hey, Ed.
Shannon, good to see you. This is all about President Trump trying to finally go on offense over these various Russia investigations, fed up with playing so much defense for so long. Remember last night, the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, tweeted enough is enough and filed defamation suits against BuzzFeed plus Fusion GPS and its co-founder Glenn Simpson over what Cohen called that phony dossier. Well, early today, the president tweeted about Democrat Dianne Feinstein leaking that transcript of Simpson's testimony, declaring, quote, the fact that sneaky Dianne Feinstein, who has on numerous occasions stated that collusion between Trump and Russia has not been found, would release testimony in such an underhanded, possibly illegal way, totally without authorization, is a disgrace. Must have tough primary, the president referring to her political prospects back home in California. Then he used a joint news conference with the Prime Minister of Norway to reiterate his claim that the U.S. looks bad on the world stage because of all of these investigations, and made the case that the narrative has now shifted.
There is collusion, but it's really with the Democrats and the Russians, far more than it is with the Republicans and the Russians. So the witch hunt continues. But I will say this, I am for massive oil and gas and everything else and a lot of energy. Putin can't love that. I am for the strongest military that the United States ever had. Putin can't love that. But Hillary was not for a strong military, and Hillary, my opponent, was for windmills, and she was for other types of energy that don't have the same capacities.
Meanwhile, as you noted, the president hedged on a possible one-on-one with special counsel Robert Mueller by saying when there's no collusion, it's unlikely to him that there would need to be an interview. He justified that stance by saying Hillary Clinton was treated with kid gloves by the FBI when she was interviewed over her email server. Of course, in the end, it will be up to Robert Mueller as to whether or not there's going to be an interview, Shannon.
All right, Ed Henry with the latest on that. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Well, President Trump making it easier to detect synthetic opioids at the U.S.-Mexico border, signing the Interdict Act. It's a bipartisan measure that provides up to $15 million for border agents to purchase an estimated 250 screening devices that would allow them to more easily detect synthetic opioids like fentanyl that are often brought across the border. Good news in the business world for American workers. Toyota and Mazda announcing plans to build a new joint production plant in Huntsville, Alabama. Starting in 2021, the facility projects to build about 300,000 Corollas and SUVs per year and eventually employ about 4,000 people. Well, during an annual New Year event with diplomats today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas is using President Trump's decision to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem as an excuse to avoid peace talks. Netanyahu claims the Palestinians have run away completely from peace talks with Israel. President Trump formally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel late last year. In a statement late tonight, President Trump says he's grateful to our next guest, Chairman Bob Goodlatte, spearheading a DACA solution and retiring. Like so many other prominent Republicans, could either issue cost them the House come fall. And powerful images coming from Southern California as rescuers work into the night, clinging to hope there are still survivors among the missing from Tuesday's devastating mudslides. Plus, exclusive reporting from inside the Supreme Court on a hot-button political issue, what today's case says about the responsibility that comes with your right to vote.
It is a shame, plain and simple. It is wrong on every level. I broke down crying. I'm proud to say it because it devastated me.
House Republicans, led by Bob Goodlatte of Virginia, have released an outline for what they say a DACA deal should look like. It includes mandatory E-Verify, an end to the diversity lottery, authorization for a wall, and much more. Some Republicans say that Goodlatte's bill is not tough enough. They're calling it DACA amnesty. And as you may have heard, 46 House members so far are retiring or not running for office, running for a different office this year. 32 of them are Republicans. 7 of them are powerful committee chairmen, just like Congressman Goodlatte. Republicans are certainly feeling the heat on immigration reform, but what else is driving so many of them to walk away from the Hill? Who better to ask about all these topics than Chairman Goodlatte himself? He joins us live. Great to have you with us again.
Great to be with you, Shannon.
Okay, so let's start with the bill today, and I want to start with E-Verify because this is something that would actually hold employers responsible and accountable in this issue of hiring people and attracting them to this country illegally. But that's something we often see completely die in the Senate. Why is there opposition from both Republicans and Democrats on that side of the Hill?
Well, I think it's some kind of fear about the reality of the situation because, frankly, 750,000 American businesses voluntarily use the E-Verify program. It's very inexpensive. You can do it on your smartphone. You can do it in a minute or two. It's 99.7% accurate. And our bill deals with that 0.3%, gives them a safe harbor until they figure out whether they have a false positive or a false negative in those cases. So it's definitely something that's needed because obviously some of the people who are not participating in it don't want to know whether they're hiring somebody who is illegal or not. And by the way, it only is prospective. It doesn't require you to go back in and look at your current workforce and
just for new hires.
And only applies to new hires. It's a very good thing.
So what about this biometric entry and exit system? Because that was, my understanding is some form of that was authorized a long time ago. So that we have this huge problem with visa overstays. We know that people come to the country. We don't always know if they ever leave. That's the majority of the illegal immigration problem.
It is a big part of it. 40% or more of the people who are unlawfully present in the United States entered legally on visitors visas, student visas, business visas, visas of all kinds, and simply never left. So you don't know whether they've left, and you can't then determine who you should be looking for that didn't comply with the law. However, the Trump administration has, even though this law has been on the book for 17 years, really taken it seriously, and they are now hard at work in implementing it. The hardest is land crossings because people are in cars. How do you determine who's in that car, who left, and so on? Airports, much easier to do. And I think you're going to see some real progress on that issue because it is of vital importance to know who came into this country and didn't leave.
Okay, so of this bill, there have been some critics on, of course, the left, but some on the right as well who think it's not tough enough. In hearing from Louis Gohmert in a piece that we cited a little bit earlier, of course, your Republican colleague from Texas, he says anyone who brings any type of legislation to the House and Senate floors that gives any legal status to groups who are not here legally before the wall is built will be the proximate cause of betraying the determined voters who elected Donald J. Trump as president. How do you respond?
Well, Louis is a dear friend. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. He has a very firm viewpoint of this, but it is, amongst conservatives in the House, a very, very small number that take that position. This is a very important bill. The president, when he ended DACA, as he should have, it's unconstitutional the way President Obama created it, said you have to address the DACA recipients. And I think Congress has responded to that, and this bill is the way to do it because it responds in a way that he asked for, that includes also border security, which is not just the wall, it is much more enforcement and what you do legally with people who enter the country and need to be returned home safely and can't be returned home today. All kinds of provisions under the rubric border security. In addition, ending chain migration, which is what happens when somebody gets a status in the United States, can bring a whole ton of people who may not benefit our economy, our society. We need to move to a merit-based immigration system, and then finally ending the visa lottery, a crazy program that brings people into this country based on pure luck and not on any merit whatsoever.
You are going to be among those who are greatly missed by your party on the Hill. You've been there a long time and you hold a very important position. Congresswoman Ros-Lehtinen out of Florida is another one who's not sticking around. Here's what she has to say about looking to the future.
We see the future, and it ain't pretty. Not for moderates in moderate districts. And in those districts where Hillary Clinton did well, we are facing some strong headwinds. And you've just got to be a very good member of Congress to supersede this wave that could very well be coming.
I know everybody probably has their own reasons for leaving, but this is a large number. Are you concerned that the Republicans could lose the House, in part because some of these seats may flip if the incumbent walks away?
Well, every party needs to take the next election very seriously, but I think that this Republican Party is starting to catch a wave in its favor, starting with the tax cuts, and the president has a very good first year if you look at it from a fair standpoint. So I think we'll build on that as we go through this year. But we got to address a number of things, including infrastructure, welfare reform, and doing immigration in such a way that, as the Speaker says, we not only take care of the DACA recipients, but we also make sure that that never happens again. And that's what the bill that I and Mike McCall, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and Raul Labrador, the chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, and Martha McSally, the chairman of the Board Security Subcommittee on Homeland, have done here. And we are going to build up a lot of support for this, but we're going to put down, I think, legislation that sets it right. If you're going to take care of people who were brought here by their parents illegally, and some came on their own, by the way, too, you need to make sure that we're stopping this from happening in the future. That's what our bill is designed to do.
Well, it's very meaty. We know that you have some work to do in building a coalition, and we'll watch to see as you get there. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Shannon, thank you.
Good to see you. All right, authorities now say 17 people have died in Southern California mudslides. Another 13 are still missing. The death toll rising as searchers pulled 2 more bodies from the stricken area in the Santa Barbara enclave of Montecito. Flash flooding there swept mud, water, and debris down from the foothills recently stripped by the brush by the Thomas wildfire. Hundreds of firefighters are hunting through the mud and wreckage. 3 more people rescued tonight, but there are still many more areas left to be searched for the missing. The body of 19-year-old college student has been found in Orange County, California. Blaze Bernstein vanished last Tuesday after he and a friend drove to a park in where his friend says Bernstein walked in around 11 p.m. and never returned. He'd been home visiting in California during his winter break from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was a student. His body was found in brush surrounding the park near where he was last seen. Police are investigating the death as a murder. Well, an intriguing day at the Supreme Court, where the justices heard arguments in a headline-grabbing voting rights issue out of Ohio. Justice Sotomayor are all fired up. We're going to explain why just ahead. And persecuted Christians from around the world gathered in Washington today. We'll introduce you to one group caught between 2 of the president's most important campaign promises. That's next. The right to vote, enshrined in our Constitution, but what responsibilities, if any, come with it for those who want to cast a ballot? That was the issue before the Supreme Court today in a hot-button political dispute that could impact elections all across the country.
Joseph Helley served multiple tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. But when he returned and tried to vote in his Ohio hometown, he was told he couldn't. Since he hadn't cast a ballot for years, his name had been taken off the voter rolls pursuant to an Ohio law. Now mayor, he's challenging the state's law.
It is a shame, plain and simple. It is wrong on every level. I broke down crying. I'm proud to say it because it devastated me. It crushed me to hear somebody in my home state say your service wasn't good enough to come home and continue voting.
Ohio is one of several states with procedures to clean up voter rolls if someone hasn't voted in consecutive elections and who fails to respond to a notice from the state. Opponents of the law say it unfairly targets minority and lower income voters by adding another procedural obstacle. But supporters say it promotes ballot integrity and prevents voter fraud.
We believe our state is one where we make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. We believe our system bridges that balance.
A predictable split developed inside the court today, especially over how to treat those who won't confirm their voting eligibility or whether or not they've moved. Justice Sonia Sotomayor asking, quote, how can we read this statute to permit you to begin a process of disenfranchising solely on the basis of that with no independent evidence whatsoever that the person has moved? But Justice Anthony Kennedy seemed to speak for a majority on the bench, saying, quote, the reason they're purging them is they want to protect the voter rolls from people that have moved and they're voting in the wrong district. That's the reason. What we're talking about are the best tools to implement that purpose.
You might see the conservatives, at least some of them, more inclined to say that this is permissible, that what Ohio is doing is lawful because they are not knocking people off the rolls simply because of a failure to vote. Instead, what they're doing is they're saying you failed to respond to our inquiry.
We have this culture that's come up with some of these Republican-run state houses of trying to limit the vote as much as possible in order to gain a partisan advantage.
We expect a decision, by the way, from the court by June. Well, a report from the Washington Free Beacon alleges White House officials and congressional leadership are scrambling to save the Iran nuclear deal. The White House is staring down a Friday deadline in order to preserve the nuclear agreement. It would have to waive key economic sanctions on Iran. Officials are reportedly working to convince the president that waiving these sanctions is, for now, the best course of action. In Washington today, religious watchdog group Open Doors USA revealed its 2018 World Watch List, ranking the top 50 most dangerous countries for Christians. Iran placed 10th on the list. Exhibit A, in making that case, is a group of about 100 Iranian Christians and other religious minorities residing in legal limbo in Austria. Their emigration status to the U.S. on hold. It was put there late in the Obama administration. So what now? Leland Vitter joins us live with that story and more. Good evening, Leland.
Oh, good evening. Some of these Iranians worried they may be sent back to Tehran. Quite literally, it appears these Iranians are caught between two of the president's most repeated campaign promises: the travel ban and protecting Christians around the world.
This is people's heads are chopped off by the hundreds, by the thousands. And if you're Christian, you have no chance. I have such tremendous support, it's unbelievable.
Then candidate Trump promised protection to Christians abroad and to the American people from terror.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Perfect example, activists say, is the Trump administration's unwillingness to let in about 100 Iranians waylaid for a year in Vienna, Austria, awaiting refugee status.
We really would encourage the administration to go very carefully on this issue. So sending these Christians back certainly could be a death sentence.
The group of Christians and other religious minorities arrived in Austria seeking protection from Iran's notorious religious persecution. So bad that last week the State Department designated Iran among 10 countries of particular concern for violations of religious freedom.
We must not be silent.
But activists for the 100 claim the administration isn't just remaining silent, but refusing to overturn an Obama-era decision to put a hold on the group's resettlement in America. It's not just threats from Iran's IRGC or ISIS facing Christians in the Middle East. Terror attacks against Egyptian Coptic Christians continue. A gunman killed 9 at a Cairo church around Christmas. 28 died when their bus was attacked en route to a monastery. And twin bombings on Palm Sunday killed 49.
And they kidnapped the Christian girls and then forced them to marry Muslim guys. We need a help and hand for Upper Egypt to for more security there, especially for the Christians who live in small villages.
Well, tonight the State Department gave us this statement about the 100 Iranians in Vienna, saying they can't comment on a specific case. But since 1983, the United States has resettled 53,000 Iranian religious minorities via Austria. Since January 2017, they have resettled over 600 Iranian religious minorities, also through Austria. The safety and the security of the American people are paramount, the State Department says. Iranian refugee applicants under this program are subject to the same stringent security vetting process that applied to refugee applicants of other nationalities considered for admission to the United States of America. And this really highlights the difficulty of these decisions, Shannon. Vetting people from the places where Christians are persecuted the most is inherently the most difficult to do.
Absolutely right. Leland, thank you so much for an update on that story. Well, more and more companies are giving out bonuses in the wake of the president's tax reform bill passing. So why are Democrats downplaying the good news? Our political panel is going to break it down next. Plus, most in the media may have moved on, but the Trump administration has not. When it comes to the plight of thousands of Iranian protesters jailed, tortured, some killed by the terrorist regime. What the White House is saying about that tonight. Straight ahead. Republicans quick to seize on headlines about companies giving bonuses to employees and utility companies lowering rates as a result of the newly passed tax plan. Democrats, not so much. Listen to this.
If Democrats take control of Congress, would you repeal the tax law?
Well, what we have to do is change it. You got to take out the parts that are giant giveaways to big corporations that right now the Republicans plan for hardworking families to eventually pay for.
Sure, but you have companies, Senator, like Eversource in Massachusetts, the electricity company, announcing that they're going to give a big break to consumers.
And good for them.
And so which ones do you take out of the list?
Look, it is $1.5 trillion that the Republicans gave away to billionaires and to giant corporations.
Joining me now, Isaac Wright, Democratic strategist and partner with Forward Solutions Strategy Group, and Alex Conant, former communications director for Senator Marco Rubio and partner with Firehouse Strategies. Great to see both of you here tonight.
Good evening. Good to be here.
Okay, so where do we go with this? Just a reminder, the Tax Policy Center, which is not a right-leaning group, in fact, often accused of leaning to the left, says their analysis, 80% of people are going to get a tax cut. 15% get no change, and so 5% are going to see some kind of increase, and most of them are high earners. Anyway, they broke this down further, Isaac, and said that middle-income families, 90% of them get a cut, 3% stays the same. So why is this so terrible?
So the question is where are the values in the tax cut, right? How much are you seeing people get? And you're seeing 50% of the value of the same tax cut you're talking about going to the wealthiest 1%. The other 99%, and that's just next year.
Why wouldn't they get the most cuts?
And that's just next year. When you look at what it's going to be in 10 years from now, you're going to see corporations who will be getting around $49 billion total in taxes. You're going to see around an $83 billion tax increase on individual taxpayers.
But that's only if they vote not to extend these tax cuts. And that'll be Democrats and Republicans together making the decision.
What they voted to do. They had the option. This Republican majority had the option. What are our priorities? Do we make the corporate tax cuts for corporate shareholders and CEOs permanent, or do we make the tax cuts for working people permanent? And they went with the corporate tax cuts as permanent, and the rest of us are stuck with the temporary trickle-down economic hope.
It's going to be terrible having that 80% middle-class tax cut. Excuse me, 90%.
Right, we're cutting taxes for the vast majority of taxpayers. Some of the people that are seeing tax increases, by the way, are Elizabeth Warren's constituents in high-tax Boston and Massachusetts. Those are the taxpayers that might see a small increase if they're making a lot of money. But the reason that the corporate tax cuts are permanent are so that businesses have the confidence to give out the bonuses, to raise the minimum wage, like we're seeing companies doing all over the country. You might call that trickle down, but that is real money for real people, and I don't know how anyone could be against that.
Let's put a little perspective on it. AT&T announced $1,000 tax cuts for some employees. They laid off 2,000 other employees at the same time 2 weeks for Christmas.
We cut taxes because it would have been a lot worse if we hadn't, I guess.
Because those people don't have an income to pay taxes on anymore. You're talking about people who literally lost their job from the same corporation you're praising for how generous it is to these workers with its trickle-down
But Isaac, do you think those people's jobs were cut because AT&T got a giant tax cut?
No. But nor do I think
have had something to do with before the tax cut.
Nor do I think that the $1,000 is a fair representation of the tax cut. Look at Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is getting $26 billion in tax cuts, right? If they joined with a $1,000 bonus for employees, that's a fraction. That's a tiny crumb from the table for the working people who actually power America's economy. Okay. Right? Who wants to be trickled on? Let's share the wealth with everybody at the table who's working to put into this economy, not just shareholders of the richest corporations.
And that's what this tax cut does. As you said, 80% of taxpayers are going to see a tax cut thanks to this.
But that's the problem. That's actually not what it does if you read the math, right? Like if you actually check the math.
This is from the Tax Policy Center that broke down all of the numbers.
Yeah, so let's look at that same report. That literally the same report you're citing is the one that also points out the difference in the tax cut, the trickle-down effect. The fact that middle-class taxpayers are going to get half the value of this tax cut in the first year.
90% of them. So 90% of middle-class houses out there are getting a tax cut. 90% of them.
It's not a complaint they're getting a tax cut. It's a complaint at how little they're getting compared to these giant corporations and CEOs.
Clearly, the people that pay more in taxes are going to be getting a larger tax cut. But people who currently pay no income taxes at all are going to be seeing a higher tax rebate thanks to this tax. Virtually everyone in America is going to have more money in their pocket because of this. It's why, for instance, retail stocks are soaring now, because Americans are going to have more money to spend at places like Target and Walmart. It's why their stocks are up since we've passed tax reform. Look, giving more Americans more money to spend on their families, giving them more of their hard-earned paychecks to keep, that is good politics. Why Elizabeth Warren would be on TV, why you would be here arguing that this is somehow bad for the country, that's bad economics, but it's also terrible politics. I'm glad to see Elizabeth Warren out there. If that's the Democrats' message going into the midterms, we're going to be just fine.
It's an $83 billion tax hike on working Americans in the next 10 years. That's clear. That's the same report you're citing from the TPC.
That is something that these two parties are going to have to get together and work out.
That's over the course of 10 years. That's collective over the course of 10 years.
But in the meantime, they're going to get higher paychecks and more money back on their tax rebates, and that's a bad thing?
And they're they're going to pay more in taxes in the long term. I just don't understand how Republicans can justify. There's a reason why the last Quinnipiac poll said Americans oppose this 2-1, because they're going to see their taxes go up over the long term.
90% of the middle class is getting a tax cut. I don't understand. Somehow these numbers are not
$83 billion tax.
When Elizabeth Warren talks about wanting to make changes to the tax reform, she's talking about what Isaac's talking about. She wants to raise taxes on people.
That's not true.
Okay, we're going to take this into the commercial. We'll continue that, but in the meantime, we got to take a break here, guys. Thank you very much. All right, you've seen the protesters on the streets of Iran, but what about the plight of the nation's Christians? We're going to investigate that next, and we'll tell you about Vice President Mike Pence's newest assignment. It's going to take him even closer to North Korea. The Trump administration says it is deeply concerned that Iran has imprisoned thousands of citizens for engaging in peaceful protests. A White House statement released today says we will not remain silent as the Iranian dictatorship represses the basic rights of its citizens and will hold Iran's leaders accountable for any violations. The administration is also pushing for the release of all political prisoners in Iran. The statement comes as it appears the U.S. may be on the brink of denying 100 Iranian Christians and other religious minorities entry into this country, according to the Washington Free Beacon, sending them back to Iran. Joining me now, Nina Shea, the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, it seems like for now, at least what we can tell from the outside, these protests in Iran have died down, but now there are people jailed because of their role with it. We've seen family members lining up there at Evin Prison, which we know is a terrible place. What do you think becomes of them? I mean, the U.S. is speaking out, but there's only so much we can do.
Well, I think that we need to be collecting their names and using those names as we did with the Soviet dissidents during the Cold War. We keep their names alive, helps them to stay alive, and also to really broadcast and let the American people know, let the world know the brave heroism of these people who did risk their lives to protest for freedom. It was far deeper, Shannon, than economic grievances. They were really taking on the clerical rule and the tyranny of that theocracy. They were calling basically for religious freedom, and they were doing offenses that could give them the death penalty, that is blasphemy. And the women played a very big role, and they have been protesting and will continue to protest in a quiet way on the social media by expressing their freedom of dress, by taking off their headscarves and showing their faces.
Meantime, we have this other case I know that you're monitoring of about 100 Christians, other religious minorities with them as well, who left Iran under a program. They were invited by the U.S. into Austria. Many of them sold their businesses, their homes, every possession they had to get there to Austria. And now, at the tail end of the Obama administration, for some reason, some of these folks made it in, but there are about 100 of them that were blocked, and they're kind of left in limbo. We understand some of these Iranian Christians are now living in homeless shelters in Austria because they can't seem to get into the U.S. Now they fear they're going to be sent back to Iran, which some people say for them would essentially be a death sentence.
Yes, it would be a death sentence, or could be a death sentence. It's they've suffered persecution as religious minorities. This is a Shiite theocracy. These people, the Christians, they're Baha'is. They're overwhelmingly Christian, this group of 100 or so. Some are Baha'is and some may be other religions, minorities like Jews or others. To put them back into Iran in any circumstances would be dangerous for them, but to do it in the midst of a human rights crackdown would just be disastrous. And they've been there for a year, and as you said, they were invited in by the United States into Vienna. This is under the Lautenberg Amendment. This was an amendment that was devised to bring in Jews from the former Soviet Union about 27 years ago. And now it's been expanded to Iran for Christians and other minorities. And so this is very unusual. 99% of the cases in the past have gotten in. I've spoken to the relocation agency, the highest group, that Jewish group that works with these people to prepare them to come to the United States. And they have relatives here. So it really doesn't make sense. I have not heard anything. I've been in contact with the administration as well. They will not say anything to me either about what is going on.
Yeah, the State Department said they couldn't comment on any specific case. They said the safety and well-being of Americans is their priority, but they are aware of this case. So we'll continue to monitor it. We know you will as well, and try to get some answers about what's happening to these folks. Nina, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
your insights. All right, coming up, the U.S. Olympic team preparing to head to South Korea next month. We're going to tell you who else is going to be going along with them. U.S. Olympians preparing to head to South Korea next month for the 2018 Winter Games. And leading that delegation will be Vice President Mike Pence and his wife, Karen. Pence will hold meetings with South Korean and Japanese leaders during a swing through Asia. He'll also make a stop in Alaska to review our intercontinental ballistic missile defense systems. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us here on Fox News at Night. Good night from Washington. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Shannon Bream.